right, I'm going to do a very quick overview of the different types of temperament, since that is one of our key topics that we're discussing this week. All right, so first and foremost, whenever we're defining temperament, what is the difference between temperament and personality? When we say temperament, we're really referring to an infant or a child's behavioral style. A lot of times we don't continue using the word temperament in adulthood. Your temperament becomes more ingrained in your personality. There's a variety of opinions out there, but one number that we throw around quite a bit in developmental psychology is 30%. And that is about 30% of your adult personality can be linked back to your overall temperament. That's kind of beyond the scope of this discussion, but I just wanted to kind of help you see how the term temperament can fit into the term personality. But so for the purposes of this course, when we discuss temperament, we're discussing an infant or a child's overall behavioral style. And what we mean by behavioral style is their pattern of reacting to their environment. A lot of times when we look at temperament, we're looking at things like, how does this child cope with change in their environment? How do they cope with new situations? How do they cope with their general day-to-day schedule? So it's very much related to their environment and to the people in their environment. Now, if you look at the research on how much of this is genetic, you see the numbers all over the place. Right now, the currently accepted numbers is 20% to 60% of temperament is genetic. And that's obviously a huge range, right? But we don't really have any clear pattern yet that we've been able to establish in research about what parts of this are genetic and why and in what way. We also, interestingly enough, have not been able to tie it to specific genes. So we don't have specific genes that we can test for and say, if your child has this genetic profile, they're more likely to have a difficult temperament or they're more likely to have an easy temperament. So we don't have genes for it that we can test for in the same way that we've isolated certain genes to associate with different developmental disorders, or like how we have a gene that tends to determine what our eye color is, right? We don't have a set gene that we can go back to for temperament. So we know that genes influence it somehow. We know that it's somewhat genetic, but the research in that area is still, it's not necessarily in its infancy since we have been researching it for a while, but it's just not something that we've gotten super far yet in pinning down what is this, how much is it, how does it work, things like that. So moving on to the three key types of temperament. We're going to talk about easy temperament, difficult temperament, and slow to warm up temperament. So easy temperament is a primarily positive attitude. These are easy kids. They go with the flow. They're happy-go-lucky. They adapt to change pretty easily. It's easy to make them smile or cheer them up. If there's something that has caused them emotional distress, it's pretty easy to calm them down and to divert them. They don't tend to stay in that distressed mode for a super long time. With good parenting, warm parenting, responsive parenting, they can be calmed down and distracted pretty easily. And they tend to cooperate with eating and sleeping habits and routines pretty well. They're not always okay. This is a child that sleeps through the night at 8 weeks old, but they do tend to be pretty easy to get into a healthy routine when it comes to eating and when it comes to sleeping. This isn't one of those kids that if okay, we're going out of town to see family members, there's no chance that my child is sleeping for 3 days because they're going to be in a different room. This is not what you tend to see with that. They tend to respond to environmental changes pretty well, with positive and supportive parenting. So that's a general recap of easy temperament. Now, the next one is difficult temperament. These are the kids that tend to just frequently be unhappy and frustrated. They tend to withdraw from new situations, right? Like new things are not fun for these kids. They withdraw from new situations. It can be really difficult to try to get them to try new things. They're very slow to change. They don't cope with change well. They generally have a negative attitude. If you've ever been around one of those kids, it's like anything is going to set this kid off and then it's going to take an hour to calm them down. That's kind of what we're talking about here. They have a generally negative attitude. When they are in a good mood, things can go from a good mood to a negative mood just like that, even if it's something that you didn't think might affect them. And they often tend to have very poor eating and sleeping patterns. Part of that is because of new situations and slow to change, right? These aren't kids that love trying new foods or going to new restaurants or eating macaroni the way that, Aunt Joanne fixes it compared to the way that mom fixes it. Would have a hard time sleeping in a new place, would have a hard time adjusting to a new bedtime routine, can be difficult to establish a good sleeping pattern in general. They're just, it is more difficult. Now, one thing to note with this is just because somebody has a difficult temperament in infancy and childhood, that does not mean that they're forever doomed to be a difficult person. And this goes through with all the temperaments. Your temperament in childhood, while there can be portions of it that remain reflective into your adulthood personality, it's not that it's this deterministic, once you're like this as a kid, you're forever like this as an adult. And you can probably think of some examples of this in your own life, right? If people have ever said, I'm surprised that this person ended up being such a happy and laid back person because they were an absolute nightmare as a child, or vice versa. I don't know why this person is so difficult and unpleasant as an adult because they were the easiest, happiest kid ever, right? So your childhood temperament is not necessarily directly parallel or predictive of your personality in adolescence and adulthood. So people can get over being difficult kids, all right? So if you're struggling with a child with a difficult temperament, that doesn't mean it's doomed to be like this forever. And the last category is slow to warm up. And these are kids that are kind of in the middle. You wouldn't call them an easy kid, but you also wouldn't necessarily call them a difficult kid. They're slow to warm up. They tend to have a mildly negative attitude, but not as negative as those with temperament. So it's not a happy-go-lucky kid, but it's also not a profoundly negative child. They're just kind of more mildly negative. They get unsure of new situations, and when they're first in a new situation, they can be very clingy at first. But once they've been in the situation for a little bit, and once they've had that comfort of a caregiver that they can be clingy with, they do tend to become more accepting of that new situation. And if you give them time, if you give them positive reinforcement, they tend to warm up to it. A kid with this type of personality, the worst thing that you can do is try to push them, right? If they're being clingy, to say, nope, get off of me, go try this, go do this. That's going to make it take longer for them to warm up to the situation. Let them be clingy for a few minutes. Give them some time to look around and observe. Give them some positive reinforcement that I know you can do this. You're brave and you're strong and you're smart and this looks like so much fun. And stay with them. Try it together. And they do tend to warm up to the situation. It just takes them a little bit longer. Now, like the kids with easy temperament, those with slow to warm up temperament do seem to be able to get into regular healthy eating and sleeping patterns. Again, might take a little more work with the easy temperament children, but you are able to get there with them. And so that is your quick recap of the temperament types and a basic introduction to temperament as you get started on this week's materials.